Okay. Welcome to a very special Grand Rounds today. Whether you're here today in Rangos or joining us from virtually, I really want to thank you for being here for the presentation of the Howard A. Mermelstein Memorial Award and Lecture. Today, we celebrate and honor the memory of an outstanding physician, Dr. Howard Mermelstein. Dr. Mermelstein was a dedicated pediatrician, a trusted friend, and compassionate caregiver whose career was devoted to caring for Pittsburgh's children and their families. Dr. Mermelstein began his career here at Children's as a pediatric resident in 1949, and he went on to serve this community as a brilliant attending, a respected mentor, and a published clinical investigator. Dr. Mermelstein also provided valued leadership to our medical community. He served as past president of the Allegheny County Medical Society and was also our Children's Hospital medical staff president from 1989 to 1990. Dr. Mermelstein's family has generously established an endowment to support this annual lecture and award in pediatric medicine. It's my privilege to invite Dr. Mermelstein's daughter, Jan Shaw, to share a few words on behalf of the family.
Gotta find my speech. Good morning. It's really hard to believe that it's been 34 years since our husband, father, brother, and beloved friend passed away. I suspect that some of you have never heard of Dr. Mermelstein before today. I would argue that we would all not be sitting here were it not for the pioneering efforts of people like Howard Mermelstein, Gene Weiner, Paul Gaffney, and others. If one were to design a Mount Rushmore for Children's Hospital, surely one of the images would be of Dr. Howard Mermelstein. Dad was larger than life at 6 feet 4.5 inches. Those who knew him best never called him Howie because he hated that. He was beloved to this community almost from the time that he was asked by Dr. McCluskey to be one of his residents in the early 50s. He had an energy, grace, and class that was infectious. In practice, he always had a way of making patients feel like he had all the time in the world for them, yet did it with total efficiency. My brother-in-law, Paul Dubner, was lucky enough to practice with him, along with the late Bernie Michaels and Dick Paul, in what was previously known as the University Community, for 7 years before Dad's untimely death in 1991, after a courageous battle with lung cancer. Unfortunately, my brother-in-law can't be here this morning. He was going to try, but he had knee replacement surgery a couple weeks ago, and he's in a lot of pain this morning, so we'll excuse him. And my brother and niece are walking in right now, stuck behind construction. Anyway, where was I? He worked full-time, intermittently with oxygen, until 3 weeks before his death. He had a deep love for this institution, on whose staff he served as president, as well as on numerous committees. But his love extended well beyond Children's Hospital and the patients of his practice. He was deeply committed to the well-being of the practice of medicine in general, as evidenced by his service to the Allegheny County Medical Society, of which he served as president in 1979. He was deeply committed to the Pittsburgh Jewish community, in particular the Jewish Family and Children's Service, but now it's called Jewish Family Community Service, of which he served as president, and for which there's a similar award given out in his name every year. He was deeply committed to the city of Pittsburgh, living in Shady Side and Squirrel Hill, although born in Beaver County, and adoring his Steelers. He was a diehard. But most of all, was his unconditional love for his family. While this lectureship and annual award presentation began in 1994, it wasn't fully funded until 2007. My late mother, Bev Mermelstein, and we 3 kids, my sister Margie Dubner, my brother Bob Mermelstein, and I, as well as our aunt, Howard's late sister, Eleanor Mermelstein, decided that his name should live on forever. So we created the endowment and award presentation. Special thanks to Carol Ashby and Amy Gelsheiser and all the staff at the Children's Hospital Foundation for providing the nuts and bolts to get this done. I hope this provides a little background for the development of the criteria for the selection of honorees for this award, which this year is presented to Dr. Sylvia Choi and Robert Hickey. I just heard that Dr. Hickey is in San Francisco at a research conference, so he can't be here, but I think he's coming in over Zoom, but Dr. Choi is here. The awardee is chosen by closed ballot, distributed by either regular or electronic mail to the entire medical staff and reviewed by a small but representative subcommittee of the medical staff and I as a member of the Mermelstein family. Dr. Choi, known as the GOAT among her peers, has been with Children's Hospital for over 20 years and has consistently shown patients and colleagues what hard work looks like. She's a tireless advocate for her patients and their families, and she is a trusted advisor to her students. One of the people who nominated Dr. Choi had this to say about her. Dr. Choi is a positive influence on every patient, family, trainee, and colleague who has the good fortune of interacting with her. She sees the potential in all of us. Dr. Choi tirelessly advocates for the best care for her patients. She is a true leader and mentor and has a gift for elevating and finding opportunities to advance the careers of her colleagues, particularly women in medicine. Dr. Hickey, I believe, is the first doctor from emergency medicine that's been nominated and selected for this award. And for that, I'm really proud to speak about him. Throughout his decades of dedicated service to his patients, the pediatric profession, and to Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, he has helped transform UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh into a national leader in pediatric medicine through his scholarship, teaching, and advocacy. His influence, however, reaches beyond UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. Throughout his esteemed career, Dr. Hickey has advanced pediatric emergency medicine through clinical excellence, scholarly work, and leadership. His work in pediatric resuscitation has significantly impacted the care of critically ill and injured children, improving outcomes and establishing best practices nationwide. One of his colleagues had this to say about Dr. Hickey. Bob is an icon in our emergency department. Not only is he a brilliant physician, he's an excellent teacher and a leader in PEM research. He serves and has served as a mentor to many and is the one we all turn to when we have a medical quandary on or want a second opinion about a patient. Ask Bob is heard throughout the department, from the division chief to the residents. The Mermelstein family is happy to honor Dr. Choi and Dr. Hickey. I'd like to call on Dr. Conti to present the awards to both doctors.
I just want to begin by thanking those of you who took the time to submit nominations for this year's award, and to the physicians who served on the selection committee, and Jan also who served on the selection committee with us. Your input made this process very meaningful and inspiring, and it's really clear how deeply our community values the great physicians that we have today. So this year, the award is being presented to two of our hospital-based physicians, Dr. Sylvia Choi and Dr. Bob Hickey, and I'm thrilled to honor both of them today. They've been exceptional colleagues, trusted advisors to me personally, and each reflect the values of Dr. Mermelstein. Commitment to teaching and the betterment of our profession, deep compassion for patients and families, integrity recognized by peers, and service to the community. And across their nominations, there were several themes that stood out and shared by both Sylvia and Bob. Dedication, tirelessly advocating for the best care for their patients and demonstrating an exceptional work ethic. Leadership, humble servant leaders who inspired others through compassion and steadiness. mentorship, gifted educators, always generous with their time and ready to teach, listen, and guide, and integrity, professionals who elevate everyone around them, demonstrating in every interaction and trusted for their good judgment. Dr. Choi from our Division of Pediatric Hospital Medicine, known for her impeccable clinical care, her open-door mentorship, and unwavering commitment to teaching and faculty development. She is a powerhouse, and she's often the go-to for thoughtful, grounded advice and a steady voice of support for so many across this hospital. And Dr. Bob Hickey, an icon in pediatric emergency medicine, a brilliant clinician, nationally recognized researcher, and lifelong teacher. He's a remarkable ability to blend humor with reality, and his teaching is grounded in science, sharpened by experience, and made memorable by his wit. So together, these two amazing physicians exemplify the best of who we are as a pediatric community here at Children's. And it is my great honor now to present the Howard A. Mermelstein Award to Dr. Sylvia Choi and Dr. Bob Hickey. I think Bob are you on?
Yes, can you hear me? Sylvia, can you hear me? Well, thumbs up if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Oh, good, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm in a research meeting in San Francisco and so sorry I could not join all of you in person. I especially regret not getting to meet the Mermelstein family and Dr. Offit. Forgive me if I read some of this. It's 5 a.m. here. I'm still caffeine-apenic. I was truly surprised and humbled by the announcement, and being recognized along Dr. Sylvia Choi makes it all the more poignant for me. I have known and admired Sylvia since she was a chief resident. She's an amazing clinician, teacher, leader, and most importantly, a truly wondrous human being. What a colleague. With respect to Dr. Mermelstein, I just barely crossed paths with him. But I did find an article published in Pediatrics in 2012 that describes Dr. Mermelstein's contribution to the Korean War. In part, it describes him performing a tracheotomy on a child who was dying with diphtheria without ever having done one previously. Put yourselves in his shoes for a moment. Imagine the urgency, the fear, the necessity, the hope, and most importantly, the courage of Dr. Mermelstein in that moment. And then we must acknowledge the horrible circumstances of war which placed him into that position. I sometimes say to our trainees, only half jokingly, that the most important indication, the number one indication for any procedure is, I haven't done that before. Better yet, I haven't seen that before. Or my favorite, you want me to do what? But a tracheotomy, that is a quantum leap. Dr. Mermelstein was a truly remarkable, courageous physician and a servant leader. What does this award mean to me? Well, first, my mom told me she's proud of me, but it's kind of a low bar. She's my mom. And she cries at Hallmark commercials. She's very emotional. So in truth, these awards aren't really about the recipients. They're about all of us and give us the opportunity to celebrate the absolute joy of practicing pediatrics. Working alongside our trainees, colleagues, nurses, APPs, staff members, and most importantly, our patients, teach us, support us, and make us better. These sorts of awards, I think, are for all of us. I have been fortunate, very fortunate, to practice in a great department, great division chiefs, great chairpersons, in a great city, the great city of Pittsburgh. As I like to refer to it, Paris of the Appalachians. Thank you for the award, but most importantly, thank you for the opportunity to be grateful, That's meta. Enjoy grand rounds with Dr. Offit. You're in for a treat. Thanks.
It's always hard to follow Bob. So
I have known about Dr. Mermelstein's legacy, incredible legacy, for so many years, ever since I was a pediatric resident here at Children's and would come to Grand Rounds, the Mermelstein Lecture. So I had no idea, though, about his service to our country in the Korean War. And he helped co-found what has then become the first children's hospital in South Korea. And what makes this even more meaningful is that my parents were children in Korea during the Korean War, and I still have relatives who live there. So truly, Dr. Mermelstein's impact has been global. So I think, as Dr. Hickey said, right, this is such an honor. I am so humbled to be receiving this award, especially with him, because he was one of my teachers, because clearly he's so much older than I am. And yet, you know, really this award belongs to all of those who taught me. And so many of them are former recipients, including Dr. Ellen Wald, Dr. Basil Zitelli, Dr. Sarah McIntyre, and now Dr. Bob Hickey. I'm grateful to my family for supporting me. I'm most grateful to the patients and families who give us the privilege of caring for them in their time of need. And I think, as Bob said, we all learn from them. They have taught us so much. And then special gratitude to the Mermelstein family. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to reflect on your father and grandfather's incredible career and to remind us of the power that one person can have on the lives of so many. Thank you.
Thanks. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Green, and I have the honor and pleasure of introducing our speaker today, Dr. Paul Offit. Dr. Offit has won more awards than I could talk about during the remaining time left for Grand Rounds. I think key points for you all to know is that he is a former CHP resident, having trained here back in the day, I think with Dr. Urbach, who's so well dressed today. Dr. Offit is also a champion, and in these times that we're going through today, particularly challenges to pediatric care and the attack on vaccines, I can think of no one better than Dr. Offit to speak to us about the current events and potential responses we can have to address the issues that we're all dealing with. So please warmly welcome Dr. Offit back to Pittsburgh and to Children's Hospital Pittsburgh. Thank you.
So thank you. It's an honor to give the Mermelstein Lecture. I certainly remember Dr. Mermelstein as Mermelstein, Michaels, and Paul. That's okay. So it's been a rough year for vaccines. Let's start at the beginning. January 30th, 2025. That is when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appeared before his second confirmation hearing in front of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. The head of that committee was Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, who is an adult gastroenterologist. He certainly is a fan of vaccines, and he certainly knew what was in front of him. He knew that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had for 20 years been an anti-vaccine activist, science denialist, and conspiracy theorist. He knew that he had been paid hundreds of thousands of dollars every year by Children's Health Defense to represent them, and they were anti-vaccine activists. He knew all that. And I talked to him 4 times before that committee meeting, including the night before the committee meeting. And he knew that the threat, I think, that RFK Jr. was going to be to vaccines. But as he said to me the night before that committee hearing, which made me know for sure that he was going to be a yes vote, is he said, well, it's tricky. Okay, so he asked, Senator Cassidy asked RFK Jr. during that hearing, as did Senator Sanders, you must admit that vaccines don't cause autism, right? And he said, I don't admit that. I don't admit that because there's no good studies to show me that. If you show me studies that prove that vaccines don't cause autism, I'll believe it. Then at the end of that hearing, he held up this study by Anthony Mawson and colleague called Vaccination and Neurodevelopmental Disorders, a study of 9-year-old children enrolled in Medicaid. This, he said, this is a gold standard study. So whenever you hear him say the phrase gold standard, think of this, because what this study was, it was published, quote unquote, in a WordPress press blog. It was not in a scientific journal. It was not in a medical journal. It was not peer reviewed. It was funded by an anti-vaccine organization, the National Vaccine Information Center. This paper defined vaccinated and unvaccinated based on billing codes. Unvaccinated children might well have been vaccinated through the Vaccine for Children's program. There's no way he would have known that. And it didn't track specific vaccines. It failed to control for a lot of potential confounding variables like healthcare seeking behavior, socioeconomic background, and medical background, which is why it was never published. That was his gold standard study, the proof that vaccines cause neurodevelopmental delays. And so Cassidy voted yes, and he tried to make us all feel better by saying that he'd secured key commitments from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Specifically, he said, Mr. Kennedy and the administration committed that he and I would have an unprecedentedly close collaborative working relationship. He is committed that he would work with current vaccine approval and safety monitoring systems and not establish parallel systems. If confirmed, he'll maintain the CDC's ACIP recommendations without changes. February 13th, 2025. On that date, following a vote of 52 to 48 in the Senate, RFK Jr. is sworn in as Secretary of Health and Human Services. The next day, this headline appears in a West Texas newspaper, confirming the first case of measles in a county in an unvaccinated child. There were actually 2 children that were admitted to the hospital in Lubbock, Texas. That's how they knew there was measles in Lubbock, Texas, because children had been admitted. Most children with measles aren't admitted to the hospital. So this already told you they were looking at the tip of a much bigger iceberg. It's centered on a Mennonite community that generally refuses vaccines and generally doesn't choose to look outside their community for medical help. So those couple cases very quickly became 58 cases, which became 90 cases, which became 198 cases. And by February 26, a child died of measles in this country. That's the first child death from measles since 2003, more than 20 years ago. Then a second child died. And the outbreak continued, spread from Texas to a variety of other states. In fact, according to the most recent CDC data, and this is from their website, it's involved about 1,600 cases in 42 states and jurisdictions. This is this, by the way, if you talk to, this probably is the most upsetting slide that I'm going to show you, because if you talk to people on the ground, they think there's at least 5,000 cases in this country and probably as many as 10,000 cases, because the CDC's surveillance system has been shredded. And so it's not only that we're seeing more measles or more influenza deaths and more pertussis deaths than we have before, it's that we may not know about it because of what has been a really crippling of the CDC surveillance system. So we've had now the biggest measles epidemic in this country that we've seen in 33 years. Okay, so a word about measles, because it struck me in our hospital that there were a number of physicians that came up to me when we had a case of measles admitted to the hospital that said they'd never seen measles before. So just a word about measles. Starts as a rash at the hairline, a blotchy red rash that spreads to the face, trunk, arms, and legs. Before the first measles vaccine became available in 1963, about 3 to 4 million people would be infected with measles every year in this country. 48,000 would be hospitalized and 500 would die. Hospitalizations were typically caused by severe pneumonia or dehydration or both. About 20% of children with measles are hospitalized. Measles virus also infects the brain, causing about 1,000 cases of encephalitis per year pre-vaccine in this country, and about 25% of those were left with permanent deficits, primarily blindness and deafness. Between 1 to 3 per 1,000 children with measles died from the disease. And then there's this, a chronic measles infection of the brain called subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, where the child gets measles, recovers, and then years later, 5 years later, 7 years later, gradually deteriorates, a deterioration in personality, deterioration in handwriting skills, ultimately a descent into a vegetative state from which there is no escape. This affects about 1 in 100,000 children with measles and is a situation in which there is no hope. This is a uniformly fatal disease. Okay, so how will Robert F. Kennedy Jr. respond to this measles epidemic? He's not being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars by Children's Health Defense anymore. He's being paid by us, the taxpayer, to represent the best health for children and adults in this country. How would he respond? March 17, 2025, after 2 children in this country had died from measles and 3 people had died from measles overall, which was equaled the total number of deaths from measles in this country over the last 25 years combined. He goes on Fox News with Sean Hannity to promote beef tallow over seed oils, but while he was there, he said the following: "The measles vaccine kills people every year," which is not true. "The measles vaccine causes blindness and deafness," which is not true. "The measles vaccine causes the same symptoms as measles," which is not true. "And that natural measles prevents cancer, heart disease, and autoimmune disease." He says this on national TV. He's the Secretary of Health and Human Services. We've had 3 people die from measles in this country, and including 2 healthy little girls, 6 and 8-year-olds. And this is what he says. And so right there, he should have been asked to step down from his job, because he was obviously not the guy. He is still the anti-vaccine activist that he had been for 20 years, but nothing happened. Nobody said anything. And at this point, I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. knew that he had no government oversight, that he could do whatever he wanted to do. April, I'm going to try and end on a positive note. Okay, so this is brutal, but April 29th, 2025, RFK Jr. visits Texas, where these 2 little girls have died, and made the point that we needed to focus on chronic diseases like autism and diabetes that deserve far more attention than measles. Nothing to see here. On May 27th, he did a 1-minute video on X with Marty McCary, who's the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration on his right, our left, and Jay Bhattacharya, who is the head of the National Institutes of Health on his left, where he said today, the COVID vaccine for healthy children and healthy pregnant women have been removed from the CDC recommended immunization schedule. Bottom line, it's common sense and it's good science. We are now 1 step close to realizing the President of the United States' promise to make America healthy again, thus violating one of the things that he had promised he would do to Senator Cassidy, that if confirmed, will maintain the CDC's ACIP recommendations without changes. Now, typically, changes in vaccine policy are made by the ACIP with input from liaison groups, like the American Academy of Pediatrics. Decisions are often an open, transparent, deliberative process with allowance for public comment, not a 1-minute video on X making a simple declaration. This decision was made behind closed doors in direct contrast with RFK Jr.'s claim that he would usher in an era of radical transparency. So should healthy young children receive a primary COVID-19 vaccine? There was a presentation by Fiona Hapers in April of this year to the ACIP, back when we still had an ACIP. And here's what she presented. She showed that about 4% of COVID hospitalizations were occurring in children, primarily young children, children less than 4 years of age. If you looked at the number of hospitalizations from COVID in general, this meant that there were probably about thousands of children who were getting hospitalized with COVID. Of those who were hospitalized, 1 in 5 were admitted to the intensive care unit. Again, mostly young children. Of those who were hospitalized who were less than 4, you can see that 60% less than 2 were previously healthy, and that 40% between 2 and 4 were previously healthy. So were healthy young children getting hospitalized and being admitted to the intensive care unit because they were infected with COVID? Yes. And in addition, although young children are far less likely to die from COVID than, say, someone who's older, there were still 152 deaths reported in COVID. That's why it was that the ACIP had a recommendation for COVID vaccines for healthy young children. But because of his influence, because of his 1-minute video, basically, if you look at the COVID line, which is that blue line in the middle, they removed that as a recommendation and just said it should be shared clinical decision-making, because that's where he's going. He wants to make everything shared clinical decision-making. If you read Project 2025 under the CDC section, it says it wants to remove CDC as a recommending body. It's up to you. If you want to get it, great. If you don't want to get it, great. It doesn't matter whether or not you were in a high-risk condition and a vaccine would benefit you. That doesn't matter. Just, it's up to you. Okay, so what's going to be the impact of this non-recommendation? SARS-CoV-2 virus will likely continue to circulate for years, if not decades, if not centuries. There are 4 strains of human coronavirus that circulate in this country. all like this one, were animal to human spillover event, although you immediately lose the audience when you say that, by the way. 2/3 of the American public believe this was a lab leak. It wasn't a lab leak, but that's okay. So one of those strains entered the US population in the late 1700s, another in the late 1800s. The other two are more recent. Assume this virus is going to be with us for a while. All children will be fully susceptible to this virus by 6 months of age after passively transferred antibodies from the placenta have faded. Absent a clear recommendation for young children, parents may be less likely to vaccinate them, putting them at risk to be among the thousands of young children who will be hospitalized every year. Absent a clear recommendation, issues of insurance company and liability also come up. So the woman who gave that talk, Fiona Havers, when she heard him get up in front of that, on that X 1-minute video and say what he said, she quit the CDC. And to her credit, she has appeared on CNN. She has been interviewed by the New York Times. There was a frontline piece on RFK Jr. that aired a couple nights ago. It was like 10 to 12 at night, so nobody's up then. But in any case, it's still going to be around so you can see it. But she got up there and she's just made it very clear what she thought that recommendation could do and what she thought the potential harm was. Okay, August 19th, 2025. To their credit, the American Academy of Pediatrics immediately stood up and said, no, infants and children 6 to 23 months of age are at high risk for COVID-19. The AAP recommends, clearly recommends, not should be considered, recommends that all infants and children in this age group who do not have contraindications receive that vaccine. And then they had a list of reasons why. So good for them. They basically said, it doesn't matter what the ACIP says, it doesn't matter what the CDC says, because they are now in the hands of somebody who is an anti-vaccine activist. We are clearly recommending this vaccine. RFK Jr., always has, so people say RFK all the time. I liked RFK. I mean, he was a good guy. He sort of stood up for the poor in this country. This is his son, RFK Jr., immediately attacked this AAP group by putting out this post. This is a screenshot from the American Academy of Pediatrics webpage thanking the organization's top corporate donors. These 4 companies make virtually every vaccine on the CDC recommended schedule. AAP is angry that CDC has eliminated corporate influence in decisions over vaccine recommendations and returned CDC to gold standard science. Be careful whenever he says that, and evidence-based medicine, laser focused on children's health. So why did he say this? He said this because he can't make a case for why it is that you shouldn't get vaccines, right? I mean, if he had data showing why it is that children, healthy young children don't need a vaccine, great, present it, and then we can have a discussion about the relative value of each of those sets of data. But he didn't have those data. So this is what he always does. He just says, you're in the pocket of industry. Although just for the record, that's an actual screenshot from the AAP site under President's Circle. He made his up because he is a deeply dishonest man. Okay, so he also said healthy pregnant women don't need to receive a COVID vaccine. So here was a study that was published in the American Journal of Emergency Medicine showing that a retrospective review of 8 published studies of about 860,000 women with COVID-19. The pregnancy was associated with a statistically significant increase in ICU admission, a need for mechanical ventilation when compared with women of reproductive age infected with COVID-19 who were not pregnant. So pregnancy is a high-risk condition for severe COVID. Similarly, this paper in JAMA Pediatrics was a retrospective review of 706 women infected with COVID-19 during pregnancy, compared with about 1,400 pregnant women without COVID. Pregnant women with COVID had a higher risk of preeclampsia, eclampsia, ICU admission, maternal mortality, preterm birth, neonatal mortality. Asymptomatic women with COVID-19 remained at higher risk for maternal morbidity and preeclampsia. The authors concluded COVID-19 in pregnancy was associated with consistent and substantial increases in severe maternal morbidity and mortality and neonatal complications. In addition, there's another reason to vaccinate pregnant women is to protect their as yet unborn child, because you see here, those who were less than 6 months of age were disproportionately represented among children who were hospitalized. So you're protecting both the mother and you're protecting the unborn child. Nonetheless, despite the fact that every country in this world sees pregnancy as a high-risk condition for severe COVID, we don't. And so this is, RFK Jr. was able to effectively change the CDC's website so that if you look, it said, if you look at sort of the upper left-hand portion of this, this figure, where it says COVID-19 in pregnancy, there's a gray box. And if you look at the top right, you see it says no acceptance, no guidance, not applicable. So we became the first country to not recommend the vaccine for pregnant women. And so a group in Chicago representing actually a pregnant physician sued HHS and RFK Jr. for basically making it much more difficult for pregnant women at that time to get a vaccine. I certainly got a number of emails from women who were pregnant saying, I just went into the pharmacist and tried to get a vaccine, couldn't get it because they feared liability issues. So I couldn't get that vaccine. And so this currently was halted because of the government shutdown. But this group has just reaffirmed that they think it needs to move forward because there are pregnant women who may still not be able to get the vaccine because of that. And so we'll see how that plays out. June 19th, June 9th, 2025, Robert F. Kane Jr. fired the 17 members of the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practice. These were people who had an expertise in epidemiology, virology, bacteriology, statistics, who had been advising the CDC, an external advisory group. He said that he fired them all because they all had conflicts of interest, which was not true. And he violated then the second promise that he had made to Senator Cassidy, which was that he is committed he would work within current vaccine approval and safety monitoring systems and not establish a parallel system. 2 days later, what he did, RFK Jr., was he appointed his own vaccine advisors, people who were much more like-minded to him. 2 members on that new committee of the 7 he appointed have testified on RFK Jr.'s behalf as paid expert witnesses in trials against Merck's HPV and mumps vaccines, a clear conflict of interest. 1 member had published a bogus claim about harms caused by the mRNA COVID vaccines. He's currently the head of the COVID vaccine working group at the CDC and the ACIP. 1 member who worked for the Anti-Vaccine National Vaccine Information Center has lobbied for years against school vaccine entry requirements. Only 2 members were involved in primary care, likely to have either seen vaccine preventable diseases or counseled patients and parents about vaccines, which is why nobody in the medical and scientific world right now is paying any attention to what the ACIP says or what the CDC says. In fact, Rochelle Walensky and Tom Frieden, both former heads of the CDC, have said, we can no longer trust the CDC. It's that bad. I mean, again, I'm going to end on a positive note, but I think, you know, the CDC was the sort of principal public health body in this country. I mean, it was a gem recognized by the world as an excellent public health body, and it unfortunately has been shredded in this current climate. Okay, June 25th. This actually upset me more than anything I'm about to tell you. This was the unkindest cut of all. So RFK Jr. said that he is going to withdraw the roughly $2 billion commitment that we had made, this country had made to Gavi, the Global Alliance Vaccine Initiative. So Gavi was founded in 2000. It has immunized about 1 billion children and has saved an estimated 20 million lives. The reason he said that he was going to now withdraw this money from the developing world was that they didn't, as it says, you see there, that they had ignored the science. So what science exactly had they ignored? He held up this paper by Peter Abbey called Evidence of Increase in Mortality After the Introduction of the Diphtheria Tetanus Pertussis Vaccine to Children aged 6 to 35 months in Guinea-Bissau, which is in West Africa, a time for reflection. So what he's saying, and this is what he said, that that the DTP vaccine basically was killing little girls in Guinea-Bissau. Now, interestingly, the same authors, Peter Abbey again, published a relook at their paper where they said, we did not find that early DTP was associated with increased female mortality as found in a previous study, basically withdrawing their previous conclusions. Similarly, the World Health Organization commissioned a group of different investigators to look to see whether this original paper, which essentially has been withdrawn by the same authors, they performed studies in Bangladesh, Burkina Faso, Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea that showed no negative effect of DTP vaccine.
But yeah, I accepted it. So,
He accepted it. Is that God? Okay. June 26th. So what happened here? So now you have the first meeting of this new look ACIP. The person who did a presentation, and normally when you give a presentation at CDC before a vote, you have to have something called ETR, evidence to recommendation. So you have to have your talk thoroughly reviewed by experts in the field to make sure that it's accurate, because they're about to have a vote. The person who they had giving this talk was Lynn Redwood, who founded a group called Safe Minds, based on the false notion that thimerosal, an ethyl mercury containing preservative in vaccines, cause neurodevelopmental delay, including her child's autism. So she is now actually a member of the CDC. She was also president of Children's Health Defense, which is RFK Jr.'s anti-vaccine group. She did the presentation. The original slide she submitted had studies on it that didn't exist. And she also presented data on studies where the authors later stood up and said, wait, that's not what we said at all. So this was a misleading presentation. And what it ended up doing was, when they had to vote on whether or not a thimerosal containing influenza vaccine should still be allowed to be used, they voted no. So that was the first anti-science vote. It's sort of like that scene in Jurassic Park, you know, where the velociraptor tests the fence to see where the weaknesses are. This was the first test. It wasn't a big hit. Influenza containing ethyl mercury containing flu vaccines is probably 4% of the market. So this was not a hit, but it showed what you could do. You could get an anti-science vote. Because the truth is, there have been now 9 studies looking at children who received thimerosal containing vaccines compared to children who received the same vaccines that didn't contain thimerosal, and no difference, because we're all exposed to mercury. Anybody who's drinking this contains methylmercury. Because we live on this planet, mercury is on this planet. You are exposed to far more mercury, and it's methylmercury, which has a much longer half-life, than you're ever going to be exposed to ethylmercury. It's a trivial contribution of what we encounter and manage every day. But that didn't matter. The science didn't matter. First of all, mercury never sounds good. It's not like there's a National Center for the Appreciation of Heavy Metals standing up in defense of mercury, but still. Okay, so that's what happened. They, by a vote of 5-1, had their first anti-science vote. August 5th, 2005, RFK Jr. Canceled $500 million in funding for mRNA vaccines at something called BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority in the government. The reason he said that he withdrew that money was that data showed that the mRNA vaccines fail to protect against upper respiratory infections like COVID. By the way, the goal of this vaccine is not to prevent infection. It's to prevent serious disease. It's to keep you out of the hospital, keep you out of the ICU, keep you out of the morgue, which this vaccine did. In 2021, you were 12 times more likely to be hospitalized and 12 times more likely to die if you weren't vaccinated than if you were vaccinated. The following year, 2022, you were 6 times more likely to be hospitalized and die. This vaccine works. But he nonetheless made this point. He said that HHS has determined that mRNA technology poses more risks than benefits for these respiratory viruses. I mean, so I was on the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee in December of 2020 when we reviewed the Pfizer study and the Moderna study. So 40,000 person prospective placebo-controlled trial for Pfizer, 30,000 person placebo-controlled prospective trial for Moderna. So basically 35,000 adults had received that vaccine. We were asked to vote on whether or not we approved it. Now, you know you've only looked at 35,000 people. You know that this vaccine is about to be given to hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. You also know that the other shoe will drop, because it always does. There is not a medical advance in history that has not been associated with some human price for knowledge. That's always true. The only question was going to be, how severe was this side effect and how rare? And we found out quickly that it was a rare cause of myocarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle. Pretty rare, overall about 1 in 50,000. So the highest risk group was the sort of adolescent male, or boys and young men between 16 and 29 years of age. But for the most part, transient, self-resolving, not a big price to pay. There's always some price to pay. This was not a big price to pay. Also, the virus, by the way, causes severe and occasionally fatal myocarditis. So. He also said that HHS will invest the whole virus vaccines in novel platforms that don't collapse when viruses mutate. First of all, just for the record, all viruses mutate, okay? All of them do. They mutate somewhat differently. HIV mutates so much just during a single infection that it's constantly mutating away from the antibodies that you make to that would be neutralizing. Influenza mutates so much from one year to the next that you require a yearly vaccine. Measles continues to mutate, yet it's never mutated away from recognition by vaccine-induced immunity. I mean, that vaccine has been around since 1963, and it's never mutated away from that. So vaccines are different in that way. Also, China made a whole-killed viral vaccine, which was actually inferior to the mRNA vaccine that we used here. But I love how he sort of, it's like he just figured this out. You should have watched him on that press conference. Here's an interesting idea, a whole-killed viral vaccine. I mean, has anybody thought of that since Pasteur made the rabies vaccine? Or Jonas Salk, Pittsburgh, made the polio vaccine? The other thing I think is, so he withdrew then the funding for the mRNA bird flu vaccine. I think, you know, there were three heroes in this pandemic to me. One were Katie Carrico and Drew Weissman, who in 1997 began a collaboration to make mRNA a useful technology as a vaccine technology, for which they won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2023. And the other was Operation Warp Speed. I mean, Donald Trump's Operation Warp Speed, I think, was one of the greatest medical or scientific advances in my lifetime. I mean, within 11 months of isolating that virus and sequencing it, we had done 2 large clinical trials that showed the vaccine worked and appeared to be safe. The third hero that I think nobody recognizes is NIH. I mean, when SARS-1 raised its head in Foshan, China in 2002, 2003, Barney Graham and others at NIH started working on an mRNA SARS-1 vaccine. Now, that virus never came into this country in any appreciable way. It had burned out before it came into this country. But we learned a lot from making an mRNA SARS-1 vaccine, and that's what BARDA was doing. So I think we lose a lot there. Okay, September 18th. So now the ACIP has its second meeting. Its first meeting was in June. It's this new look ACIP. We should probably think of something else to call it other than ACIP, but in any case, what used to be, what we now euphemistically call the ACIP. So now they discuss, this is next up, and this is the ACIP was supposed to meet now, actually, October 22nd, October 23rd, but I think now it looks like they're going to meet December 4th and 5th. And this is what they're going to talk about in part, which is delaying the hepatitis B birth dose. So let's talk about that. Perinatal hepatitis B infection is serious. About 85% of babies born to mothers who have hepatitis B will acquire hepatitis B in infancy. If you acquire hepatitis B in the first year of life, you have a 90% chance of going on to develop cirrhosis or liver cancer. If you're infected with hepatitis B in the first few years of life, you have about a 25 to 30% chance of developing cirrhosis or liver cancer. If you're infected by hepatitis B as an adult, you have a 5% or less chance of developing cirrhosis or liver cancer. This is a very vulnerable time. So in 1981, actually, the hepatitis B vaccine was licensed. In 1982, the birth dose was recommended for all infants, mothers who were hepatitis B surface antigen positive in the first trimester testing. In 1988, that was extended to all infants born to mothers in racial or ethnic groups at high risk for hepatitis B, which included Southeast Asian immigrants, Alaska Natives, and others. Now, in 1991, was born the hepatitis B birth dose for all children. Why? Reason number one, many women aren't screened in this country. About 12 to 16% of women never receive prenatal care, so you don't know whether they have hepatitis B. So this enables you to jump with a net. Actually, we're one of the worst developed world countries at screening. I think only Estonia is worse than us. Maybe, no, sorry, only Bulgaria is worse than us, but we're not great. About 15% of women don't get screened. Second, screening test isn't perfect. There's about a 5% false negative rate, or said another way, a falsely reassuring rate, where you think you don't have hepatitis B, but you do. Third is women can contract hepatitis B in the second or third trimester. And fourth, and most importantly, that most people don't realize, many children don't acquire the disease from their mother. In 1991, this is a paper by Armstrong and Hal Margolis, Hal Margolis was the head of the hepatitis B group at CDC. They looked at where we were in 1991. In 1991, there were 30,000 cases of hepatitis B in children less than 10. Less than 10. Half got it passing through a birth canal from a mother who was infected with hepatitis B. The other half didn't get it from their mother. They got it from coming in relatively casual contact with people who had chronic hepatitis B and didn't know it. And most people with chronic hepatitis B don't know it. There's large quantities of hepatitis B virus in the blood. So it can be transmitted by relatively unseen amounts of blood on shared towels, washcloths, toothbrushes, nail clippings, and others. And between 100 million to 10 billion infectious particles per milliliter of blood can be seen in people with hepatitis B. So, and the virus can be visible on surfaces for up to 7 days. So you don't know who your child is coming in contact with in those first 10 years of life. These are 15,000 children, less than 10, who were getting infected. They weren't getting it from being sex workers. They weren't getting it from being intravenous drug users. They were getting it this way. And there's still millions of people in this country who have chronic hepatitis B, many of whom don't know it. So with that birth dose, we essentially eliminated hepatitis B in the less than 10-year-old. It was a tremendous achievement that now is being threatened by a committee that doesn't know what they're doing. So on September 19th, the ACIP also chose not to recommend the COVID-19 vaccine for high-risk groups. These were data from Fiona Havers showing hundreds of thousands of hospitalizations and still tens of thousands of deaths from COVID. So again, the goal of the COVID vaccine is to keep you out of the hospital, out of the ICU, and out of the morgue. What most countries do with COVID vaccine now, and what we were about to do at the ACIP, I think that when Fiona Havers presented in April, they were they were now considering doing pretty much what every other country in this world does, which is really recommend the vaccine for high-risk groups, meaning people over 75, people who are immune compromised, people who have chronic conditions like chronic heart or lung disease, and people who are pregnant. That's what most countries recommend. But basically what they did is they said shared clinical decision-making for everybody. So they don't recommend it for anybody. I mean, if you're 80 years old, you have chronic lung or heart disease, your choice. So again, this is Project 2025. You're moving the CDC away from being a recommending body. But again, the good news is like groups like the American Academy of Pediatrics, groups like the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology are stepping up and saying, these are recommendations. So physicians are now looking to those bodies and not the CDC and not the ACIP. States are standing up. States are forming coalitions with other states, publishing their own guidelines. So people are reacting. And there's now something coming out in the in New England Journal of Medicine. It's called Public Health Alert. They haven't had their first issue yet, but essentially to replace Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, which was the way the CDC communicated, but they're not communicating anymore. Okay, September 29th, Secretary Kennedy said, to elevate America's health, restore public trust, and reclaim our reputation for integrity and gold standard science, the President of the United States says HHS will challenge even the most sacred public health dogmas through open debate and disciplined scientific scrutiny. So this was a 7-minute video that he posted recently, in which he showed that measles mortality had dramatically dropped before there ever was a vaccine due to better sanitation, better hygiene, refrigeration, and et cetera. His point of this video was to say measles vaccines don't save lives. That's what he said. Said the same thing about the pertussis vaccine, that the pertussis vaccine also, pertussis bacteria was causing disease, and the decrease was associated with better sanitation, hygiene, et cetera, which is to some extent true, but he omits certain critical facts. He fails to mention the fact that the measles vaccine introduced in 1963 decreased childhood deaths from 500 per year to virtually 0. He failed to mention that the pertussis vaccine introduced in the late 1940s reduced pertussis deaths from 9,000 a year to generally less than 10. Also, he only focuses on mortality. Morbidity is also something to consider, like liver cancer caused by hepatitis B virus, or blindness caused by measles, or deafness caused by mumps, or congenital birth defects caused by rubella, or cervical cancer caused by HPV. Also, just as something that not everybody knows, better sanitation and hygiene led to an increase in polio. I mean, polio was a common virus infection. Mothers were invariably infected. And only 1 in 200 people infected with polio would be paralyzed. So mothers would be infected. They would have antibodies that they would then passively transfer to their infant while the infant was being exposed to polio because it was that common. So essentially, it was like passive active immunity in that first year of life. Once we had better sanitation and hygiene, that's when polio started to take off. That's when you would see as many as 58,000 cases a year of paralysis and 1,800 deaths a year. It was better sanitation that led to more polio. He didn't mention that. Okay, so why during a year when deaths from measles, influenza, and pertussis are greater than anything we've seen in decades did RFK Jr. choose to show this video, choose to make the point that vaccines don't save lives? To know the answer to that question, this I don't recommend, is to read the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. But so I'm going to spare you that by just showing you certain clips. It's really the key pages are pages 285 to 288. In his book, RFK Jr. writes, the ubiquity of pasteurization and vaccination are only 2 of the many indicators of the dominating ascendancy of germ theory as the cornerstone of contemporary public health policy. A $1 trillion pharmaceutical industry pushing patented pills, powders, pricks, potions, and poisons, and the powerful professions of virology and vaccinology. The best approach to public health is to boost individual immune responses. The terrain is everything, the microbe is nothing. He doesn't believe in the germ theory. He doesn't. He makes that very clear in his book. Now, Catherine and I were part of the Division of Infectious Diseases at Children's Hospital Philadelphia. Everybody in our division bought into the germ theory, wouldn't you say? That specific germs cause specific diseases. You'd think that would be sort of a minimal requirement to be Secretary of Health and Human Services. So he believes that as long as you're well nourished, you don't have to worry about getting severe infections. You don't. And when those 2 little girls died in West Texas, the first thing he said was they were in a food desert. Not true. He said they were malnourished. Not true. And the doctors who took care of those 2 children immediately stood up and said, that's not true. And what did he recommend immediately? Vitamin A. He just kept pushing vitamin A. Vitamin A treats measles. Just take vitamin A. And so there were dozens of children who suffered vitamin A toxicity, specifically liver damage, because they took so much vitamin A, because you can see that point of view, right? I have a bivalent choice. Do I want to get a vitamin, which always sounds good, right? Vita Life, or do I want to be injected with a biological agent that I don't understand very well? So people chose the vitamin A choice and suffer that choice. Okay, so the next thing is I think that what RFK Jr.'s ultimate goal is to make vaccines less available, less affordable, and more feared. I think if he has his way and he's a zealot, he means that he wants to eliminate vaccines in this country. I do. I think that. And I think this is the best way to do it, is to attack the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. He has talked about adding autism to the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which according to a recent legal review is this. Specifically, we show that the immediate docket of profound autism claims actionable within 3 years limitations period would likely command compensation awards totaling nearly $100 billion, with awards thereafter running at about $30 billion each year. Those awards would quickly consume the current $4 billion balance in the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program Trust Fund, a fund which by federal law can only be replenished by an excise tax that generates about $250 million a year, less than 1% of the amount needed to cover the projected annual autism awards. If he does this, if he destroys the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, then we're right back to where we were before there was a Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. In the early 1980s, when there was a flood of litigation that just drove these vaccine makers off the market. We had 18 companies that made vaccine for American children in 1980. By the end of the decade, we had 4. And the only reason we still had 4 was because the Reagan administration passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which included the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, and that saved vaccines. But mess around with this program, and you are putting a fragile industry at risk. These are small market products. I don't think people realize that that's true, because they see the windfall profits for Pfizer or the windfall profits for Moderna, because Operation Warp Speed basically took the risk out of it for pharmaceutical companies. But I'll tell you one story, but nobody can tell this story, okay? You promise? Okay. All right, so I was fortunate enough to be part of a team at Children's Hospital Philadelphia that invented the rotavirus vaccine, Rototec. We created the strains that became Rototec. When Merck had a celebration for us, for the 3 co-inventors, the head of Merck Research Labs, who functionally ran that company, came up to me and said, "Congratulations, great job." Quote, "Why couldn't you have invented something we give every day? These are small market products." Okay, so how can we end this? How can we put an end to the assault on vaccines? I'm going to propose a solution, although it's draconian. RFK Jr. knows there's only one person he has to please. His audience of one is that guy. I didn't label this. That's Donald Trump. And as long as if as we continue to have this assault on vaccines, it may get to a point where Donald Trump sees this as something that is bad for his administration, that he doesn't want to be president of measles land. I don't have a lot of hope for that. For this reason, on September 26th, Donald Trump posted this: "Pregnant women don't use Tylenol. Useless, absolutely necessary, unless it's absolutely necessary. Don't give Tylenol to your young child for virtually any reason. Break up the MMR shot into its 3 totally separate shots, not mixed!" Exclamation. "Take chicken pox vaccine shots separately. Take hepatitis B shot at 12 years old or older. And importantly, take vaccine at 5 separate medical visits." President Donald J. Trump. He's an anti-vaccine activist too, and has been really made it clear in 2015 during the Republican primaries, when he said children are getting too many vaccines, they're getting these horse doses. So he's been an anti-vaccine activist for a long time. So I don't think he's the guy who's going to save us. Okay, and to show that he still has influence in the anti-vaccine world, Jim O'Neill is the current acting director of the CDC. He posted this recently: "Thank you, President of the United States, for your leadership. I call on vaccine manufacturers to develop safe monovalent vaccines to replace the combined MMR and to break up the MMR shot into 3 totally separate shots." This is not from RFK Jr. This is from Donald Trump. It is. It's not going to happen. Both Merck and GSK, who make MMR vaccine for this country, have already issued press releases that they're not going to do that, which is interesting because they could make more money doing it. What you do, though, is you take a 2-shot vaccine and make it a 6-shot vaccine, make it much less likely to be used. So to their credit, they stood up. Okay, here's my note of hope. I have to go back to the 1600s to find it, but nonetheless, here's my note of hope. So Galileo was a famous astronomer. So in his first treatise, he published about the rings around Saturn, the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus. But his second treatise is what got him into trouble, because what he did was he bought into Nicholas Copernicus's notion that the Earth revolved around the sun, that the Earth wasn't, according to biblical scripture, the center of the firmament. So this violated what at the time was sort of the Roman Catholic notion that the Earth was the center of the firmament. So he was brought up before the committee, this tribunal, and asked to recant that second treatise, which he did. But before he left, he looked back. This is probably apocryphal, this story, but I love it because everybody tells it, and so it works. He said in Italian, "E per si muove," which means, and yet, regarding the Earth, it still moves. It still rotates around the sun. You can make me recant it, but it doesn't. And I think no matter how many times over the next few years, RFK Jr. says that one thing or another causes autism or some other chronic disease, it doesn't. And science is a powerful, powerful thing to have on your side. It doesn't matter how many discredited doctors or scientists or congressmen or media venues, he gets to echo that claim. Science is a powerful thing to have on our side, and we have to continuously and rigorously stand up for that science, because we definitely win in the long run because the science is on our side. Thank you.